there's a really, really important question then about equality and inequality. It's not enough, I think, to talk about rights and vindicating rights. We also then have to address the whole question of, well, what does justice look like, and what does fairness mean, and what is equality? And is it sustainable to have a world where there's massive inequality? I don't know if you maybe want to speak a little bit about that, Fiachra, or even just maybe talking about the Sustainable Development Goals as well, for that matter.
In the last several years, that inequality doesn't work. It's not good for society. It's also not good for the economy, because in the long run, this huge, massive inequality doesn't lead to strong economic growth. It doesn't lead to successful countries, and so we do need a new way forward, especially in the context of, I suppose, climate chaos, where we need to find solutions that aren't destroying the planet for short-term gain. And I suppose that kind of leads us to discussing the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, which they're 17 goals. They were agreed in 2015 by 193 countries. Ireland and Kenya were very involved in negotiating the final stages. So I think in Ireland, I suppose we feel we have a bit of a personal stake in the goals. And I suppose, and again, as a wealthy country, we have a lot of responsibility to ensure they're implemented. The global goals are global in nature. It's not just about looking at progress in, say, the countries where serve works, like Mozambique or Zimbabwe or Zambia. It's also about looking at progress in Ireland. And I suppose we as Serve as an organisation have to do both. And I suppose it's the exact same with yourselves. It's about looking at what's being achieved in Zimbabwe, but it's also what's being achieved in Ireland, because otherwise it doesn't work. And I suppose it's that idea of sustainability, where a sustainable, socially just world is one we're all striving for better. And I suppose it's the very concrete reality of we need social justice to vindicate our rights and to actually have a better quality of life. And I suppose we see that we see that in Ireland, and I think we see that with, say, our partners, for example, Young Africa and Zimbabwe and Mozambique, where on a very practical level they're working to ensure that people have a right to an education, a right to access to services, a right to social mobility. And that's all the new way, or it's not really the new way, but the way we're striving to do that is with the SDGs, the global goals, as that roadmap. And I think a bit like the Universal Declaration, a bit like social justice as a concept, there's a lot of abstract stuff, but it's very concrete. There's objectives, there's targets, it's measurable. So I think that the global goals are good, they put social justice at the heart of it. Some might say they aren't perfect. I don't know. Would you have issues with the global goals, or do you think they're a good roadmap for, I suppose, achieving social justice at a global level?
Yeah, I think they're a really, really useful roadmap. I think the key thing there is that they're useful. I think you mentioned before, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is 73 years old, was a set of ideals, and very lofty ideals. But they were more than just ideals. They were supposed to be the practical things that that allow us to live together in society in a sustainable way, so that we have some harmony. Because without harmony, you end up getting conflict, and eventually that explodes into violence. The Sustainable Development Goal, but just on the human rights, they were set out in a list, and that was that. There was no way of thinking about, well, how do we actually achieve them? I think what the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 does is it sets out, okay, well, how do we now reach a point where we actually have practically made those rights effective? Because it's not much good saying that you have a right if you don't have the resources to actually achieve that right, to live that right, to experience that right. You can have a right to education, but if you live in a place where you don't have access to a school, or where the resources in your school mean that you don't get the same quality of education as somebody living in a very wealthy neighborhood, whether that's in Ireland or whether that's in Mozambique, then your right to education isn't really being fully realized. So it's important to allocate resources like that properly. And it's important, and I think what the SDGs do is that they look at how we allocate our resources. A key point about the Sustainable Development Goals and the human rights is that they're trying to create a society that's lawful, and a society where there's security.